afternoon, colleagues. Will you please remain standing whilst my chaplain, the Reverend Kevin Greaves, leads the council in prayer.
Ever-loving God, we are gathered here today to represent the people who live in the Wakefield metropolitan area. As elected members, may we truly represent all those in our wards, from all faiths, ethnicity, and from all social backgrounds, and those of all ages. For all who work to promote the positive distinctiveness of our communities, their history, but also their futures. We bring before you all in our metropolitan area who may be struggling with relationships, with debt, for those living with anxieties and stress. We pray for those individuals who work for them to improve their lives. We pray for the work of social services, for all employees of this council, and for all who work in the public sector. We bring before you all in authority and power for those who have decisions to affect the lives of others. For all who work to make our communities a safe place to live and work. For the work of all the emergency services. May all who call this metropolitan district their home take pride in its growth and its diversity. For all who live here, may they always feel valued and respected and be a part of the community that they live in. As our city grows and changes, may one thing always stay the same, that those who live here are proud to say that they are from the Wakefield Metropolitan District. Amen.
Colleagues, you will be aware that since our last meeting, we heard the news that former Mayor and leader of Council, Colin Croxall, has passed away. In addition, I've been informed that Robert Mortimer, the South and West Yorkshire County President of the Royal British Legion and a big supporter of the Mayor and Civic Office, has also passed away. Our thoughts and prayers are with the families and friends. I would ask that members to now join me in a minute's silence in memory of Colin and Robert. Thank you. Please be seated. It's a nice tune, that, Joe. Item 2 on the Council's summons is to receive disclosures by members of interest in matters under consideration. Can we take these in order, please? And will members declaring an interest please identify themselves and their particular interest clearly? Members declaring an interest are asked to also complete an interest form available in the chamber and return them to the committee officer at the end of the meeting. Firstly, colleagues, are there any disclosures, pecuniary interests to be declared? I would remind any members declaring a disclosure, pecuniary interest, that you must vacate the council chamber at the appropriate time, prior to the discussions and voting on the matter under consideration. Are there any interests other than pecuniary? Item 3 is to receive and confirm the minutes of the meeting of the Council held on the 22nd of November 2017. Are the minutes moved? Will somebody second the minutes?
Second the minutes, Mr. Mayor.
All in favour of the minutes? That is carried. Item 4 is to receive apologies for absence. Apologies for absence have been received in advance of the meeting from councillors Miss Austin, Mrs Graham and Mr Manfield, Councillor Manfield. Is there any other further apologies? Would you please identify the members concerned and clearly one after the other? Thank you. Item agenda number 5 is to deal with announcements as I may decide to lay before Council. May I begin my announcements by welcoming staff and pupils from Daneroyd Junior and Infant School to our Council meeting. I met with the party earlier today in my parlour and I hope that you had an enjoyable day and thank you for attending our meeting. They did tell me I bored them, by the way. But nothing like honesty from the children, is it? May I also welcome Councillor Michael Graham to his first meeting since his successful election in Ward 20 by-election in November. Michael. Once again, the work and talents of citizens living and connected with our districts have been recognised in the New Year's honours. Kevin Trickett, the President of Wakefield Civic Society, receives the MBE for services to the community in Wakefield. David Earnshaw, Chair of the Board of Outwood Grange Academies Trust, received a CBE for services to education, whilst writer and director John Godbar received an OBE for services to the arts. On behalf of the Council, may I offer congratulations to each of them and to all who received the honour this year. In order to assist members with their diary commitments, I can advise that the provisional council dates for 2018-19 municipal year are 25th of July, 19th of September, 21st of November, 30th of January. Budget Council for 2019 will be held on 27th of February 2019, with the final Ordinary Council being held on the 10th of April 2019. These meetings will all commence at 2 o'clock. It is also proposed that the annual Council meeting in 2019 will be held on Thursday, the 23rd of May 2019, commencing at 11:30 a.m. The meetings, together with the full calendar of meetings, will be confirmed at the 2018 Annual Council meeting. The provisional council dates will include the minutes of these meetings and will shortly be added to the council's website. Thank you, colleagues, and that concludes my announcements. As no deputations have been received for today's meetings, we will now move on to the leader's report. After the leader has presented his report, he will answer any questions on the matters raised in his report. A maximum of 30 minutes will be allowed for questions and answers. Councillor Box, would you please present your report to Council?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just to say that 30 minutes obviously isn't compulsory. Can I add my condolences to those you've expressed in relation to both Colin Croxall and Bob Mortimer. Obviously, I knew Colin Croxall for many years. We served together on the council. Can we agree that we write to Colin's family expressing our condolences on all sides? I also knew Bob Mortimer very well. I was surprised to hear that he passed away. I saw him not that long ago. So again, Mr. Mayor, if we can write to his family and express our condolences. Also, can I send our best wishes to Monica Graham, who I know is not well. And I'm sure that all of us wish her the very best, and it hopefully might cheer up somewhat if we send a letter from all of us to say, get well soon and let's see you back in council. Can I also, Mr Mayor, just express all the best to Pauline and Les Shaw. I know Les is at the moment having to shuttle between the council, home and hospital, so just to wish you, Les and Pauline, all the best. Since we last met, Mr Mayor, we have appointed 4 new staff. Beate Wagner, who's the new Director of Children's Services. She's presently at Warwickshire County Council. She starts work, I think it's early March, with us. Gillian Connolly, who's got a wealth of experience in change management, business change, etc. She's here today, sat at the back. So welcome to Gillian. Claire Elliott was appointed Service Director, Economic Growth and Skills. Most of us know Claire, worked with her for many years. And finally, Julie Russell, who's now the Service Director for Arts, Culture and Leisure, and she's from Durham County Council. And to thank Ian Sanders in particular, who spent 2 days with myself and with Denise and several other colleagues on the interviewing process. And I think Ian will agree we've got 4 great people to join the council. It means we've now got the full set of corporate management team. So we expect big things from you now. You're at full complement. Just so there's no complacency creeping in there, colleagues. Can I also comment on devolution? My views on devolution are well known. I actually believe that George Osborne was correct when he said that this devolution is not about local government reorganisation, it's about economic growth based on cities. I've always believed that a city region model was best for Wakefield because it would make sure we had the fastest growth in the shortest time. It's clear from conversations I've had, both with Conservative MPs who've been to see me in Wakefield and from ministers, that a city region model is never going to be offered to us. I do think that government might have offered it last year, but I say it was blocked by some Conservative MPs who felt that wasn't what they wanted. But we are where we are. It's clear that nobody will get any devolution unless we unite. And there is clearly a majority across the county for a wider Yorkshire model, which is why I've said that we will support a one Yorkshire proposal or a wider Yorkshire proposal to see if we can get some devolution, get some, not just powers, but resources down to Yorkshire and down to a sub-regional level. So I've made a statement to that effect. I'd like to mention Rugby League and start by talking about Wakefield Trinity. And I'd like to place on record my thanks to Michael Carter because Michael has now come back to the negotiating table and he issued a statement before Christmas to say he accepted there was no legal action that could be taken against the council. And I think it was big of him to do that. At the moment, Andy Wallhead and colleagues are talking to the owner of Bellevue with a view to making sure we get a community stadium at Bellevue as quickly as possible. We're also obviously dealing with matters at Newmarket, the planning applications that are being put in terms of the reserve matters at Newmarket, because both things are tied together. But I say I do want to thank the club for the decision that they took before Christmas and to thank the owner for engaging in very constructive negotiations. There will be a report that goes to Cabinet shortly, which will set out exactly what's happening, subject, of course, to the usual confidentiality relating to commercial matters. Colleagues will be aware that when the Newmarket scheme was felt to be the best option for Trinity, a new trust was formed. However, now that we have got a scheme that relates to Bellevue, it is felt by the council and certainly by the owner of the ground that we should create a new trust, and that's what will happen. The new trust will be made up of business people, representatives from the Rugby League, and hopefully some fans as well, so we've got a wide spread of voices who will be able to help deliver the stadium. And finally, Mr. Mayor, just to wish the best of luck to all 3 teams in the district. Obviously, Cast this time will go one step further and win the Premiership Super League title. And good luck to Trinity, but hopefully you'll finish behind us. And a special shout out to Featherstone. Special shout out to Featherstone for the absolutely tremendous achievement on Boxing Day in beating Castleford under-16 team. And obviously we wish the under-16 team from Cas all the best in the GCSEs. So yeah, great result, well done, Graham. And finally, Mr. Mayor, and this is a more serious note. I said at the last meeting, I'm going to repeat this every meeting I have to. Councillor Ahmed has still not agreed to sit on the safeguarding meetings we have, the quarterly safeguarding meetings, and I have to say that's a matter of regret. This is a non-political meeting, and as far as I'm concerned, it deals with the most important issue that we can face, which is the safeguarding of our young people and vulnerable adults. I do not understand, for the life of me, why someone would not go to that meeting. I cannot understand it. Now, we are all paid a basic allowance for the work we do in our communities. I make no comment about any work that Councillor Ahmed does in his local community and the allowance that he receives for that work. But I do make comment when somebody receives extra funding that goes over and above what elected members do in their wards. And that does involve some sacrifices for some of us here who get that extra responsibility allowance. And that includes Councillor Ahmed. So I would ask you, please go to the meetings. We know that following some of the cases we've seen, in particular in Rotherham where the Jay report was produced, that it was one of the recommendations of Jay that we should include both the chair of scrutiny and the opposition leader. That was what Professor Jay said. So I would hope that you would reconsider. I think it is a vitally important issue, the most important issue actually, that we have as a responsibility. Hopefully that's enough from me, Mr. Mayor. If I've forgotten anything, I apologise, but I'll answer any questions on what I've raised.
Are there any questions on Councillor Box's report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the light of Councillor Ahmed's non-attendance, is this not a matter that we should be referred now to the remuneration panel?
I mean, that's something I suspect that I need to have a discussion with the Chief Executive of them.
I'll come to you in a minute.
Just starting with Colin Coxall, I think I've got condolences of the Conservative group on behalf of the Conservative group on there, because Colin Coxall was a councillor for Wakefield East and was well thought of as a local councillor, regardless of his politics. Is well known even now, and there's people still in Agbury who still think he was elected still at this point as well. And I know that he contributed a lot to help the mosques in the local area of Agbury as well, the planning applications and the inception. So it's, recognising the work that he put into the area and placing our thanks to him and putting our condolences forward to his family in relation to that as well. In terms of the Yorkshire-wide devolution bid, you have backtracked from your original view, which I think I'm glad that we've influenced you in the right direction to move forward on that, because it was, I kept saying in the council chamber, and I spoke to you on a number of different occasions, that it was important that whether it was a Leeds City region, which I supported as well, against the other Conservatives in the area, I supported the wider the Yorkshire-wide bid, which was also supported by Labour MPs on the East Riding as well, so that was supported by that. But it's important, like you said, as Osborne said, that it brings economic growth to the area. So I'm glad that you've backed down on your original views and agreed to that as well. And I think it's important that we all different parties gather around that now and push the government to ensure that that actually happens. And hopefully we've got some timetables for the meetings to take place, because I know, I think next 2 or 3 weeks there'll be a meeting taking place with Sajid Javid on the matter on there as well. In terms of Councillor Graham, I'd just like to inform Council that she started stage 2 of her treatment which actually means that stage 1 has been really successful. So the initial stages were quite harsh, so she will be back operational in the next 3 weeks in terms of ward matters and council as well, which is really good news. I think Monica did want me to share that with the council. I'd like to thank councillors who've been in touch with her from all sides of the council chamber. In terms of Wakefield Trinity, I did speak to Michael Carter after the last council meeting, and I did suggest that he did put forward a retraction on the legal action against the council, because I didn't think it was in the interest of the council or in the interest of Wakefield Trinity for ensuring that happened. So I'm glad that Wakefield Trinity are working with the council, and the council is working with Trinity in that sense as well, to make sure that they get a similar process moving forward on there as well. But in terms of safeguarding panel meeting, I've said it to you before, you've raised it in the council. I've never had a personal email from any of these people here, or any matter of there. I've spoken to the chief exec about it today, and I offered last council meeting, and I've said it before, and I think you probably heard it last time as well, but I'll repeat it again, is that I've offered to sit down with any member of the council officers and discuss any of the matters on there. Now, there's been some changes, as the chief exec has informed me, that I can't discuss in the council chamber, which involves certain cases that have come through, but I'm happy to speak to him after the council meeting or another time, or with other members of the thingy on there to discuss, to move that forward. So I'm not, because of the nature of the cases, it's not possible to discuss that in the middle of the council chamber. But as I've mentioned before, in terms of remuneration, I'm not bothered, you know what I mean? So let's get that out of the open, you know what I mean? So, if some of you probably do, but I do have a job outside of here, and some of you, I get paid for it. And in terms of remuneration, that is a small percentage of what contributes to what we do here in the work, because there's a significant amount of work that comes outside the council chamber, and the work that is not just done within Wakefield, but outside of the wider region as well, Bradford meetings, Leeds meetings, etc. on there. So it's important that I'm not here for remuneration. Just make that clear to anybody. It's given, and I'm not rejecting anything like that, so I'm not going to be a hypocrite about it. But I do have a job in there, so other people that don't, I don't expect them to be in the same category on there. So that's not an issue there.
In terms of devolution, it's actually a little known fact about me that I'm really pragmatic. People think I'm not. It's true, I'm very pragmatic. I haven't actually changed my mind. I think that a city region deal still offers the best for Wakefield. And I can tell you this, I had 2 Conservative MPs came to see me, and they said to me, we spoke to George Osborne, this was 2016, they said to me, we've spoken to George Osborne, and he's told us we can have a veto over a Leeds City region deal. That's what they told me in my room. I'm not going to give you the names, but 2 Conservative MPs came to see me, and they said, we are going to block it. So don't start blaming anybody, but your lot, Tory MPs are blocking it, and I can tell you why they're blocking it. Because they feared a Labour mayor for the Leeds City region. That's why they've objected to it. Now then, despite what I think is the best model, I do accept that I'm in a minority. Don't mean I'm wrong, by the way. Sometimes a minority is right, but we've got to be pragmatic. And I'd rather accept, if that's something so I'd rather be pragmatic and make sure that we all get a deal rather than nobody gets a deal. And it was clear when you looked at the debate in Parliament that the government was saying, in effect, because Wakefield was mentioned, that they were saying, well, it's Wakefield that's stopping you getting 1 Yorkshire. Well, I'm not prepared for this council to be painted as the people who are stopping all of us getting devolution. So we will work hard now, and I will work hard to try and make sure we get the best deal for the people of Wakefield. In terms of Wakefield Trinity, it's fascinating, because the moment that the club put out a statement saying it's the council's fault and we're going to take them to court, what did Councillor Ahmed do? issued a press release. Councillor Buck should stand down, should resign. It's outrageous. We need a fresh pair of eyes to look at this, and he's leading us to disaster, financial disaster, because we'll be taken to court. That's what he told, that's what he said, issued a press release. And what's happened? Since that press release was issued, the statement was issued by the club, and he said nothing. You'd think, wouldn't you? He'd go to the press and say, I was wrong. I mean, he talks about me, you know, being pragmatic. You want to show some of yourself, pragmatism.
I think if you go through the statement, you can read what it says. It asks for your resignation on the matter of Wakefield Trinity because you were lowering the council into an expensive trial. That's what you were doing, and Wakefield Trinity actually backed off on this. So that's what it was. If you read it properly, your grammar school education should have taught you that. So that's the point of order. So the point of order is incorrect information.
I've got correct information, and I know what the statement said. You were saying I should resign because the club were blaming us, and you were saying I was going to lead us into some expensive litigation because it was the council's fault. I know what you said. Now then, you're wrong. And you can't admit it, can you? Because you're the kind of person who can't admit anything where you're wrong. And you're wrong. So he goes issuing a statement, because that's all he can do, this our keyboard warrior, right? So he goes issuing a statement, oh, Councillor Box should resign. So when it's sorted out, because the club turn around and say they were wrong, and that's why I said about Michael Carter earlier, to his great credit, Michael accepted it was wrong and there is no case against his council. So what does he do? Nothing. Doesn't issue a statement to say, I'm pleased that I was wrong and that this matter's been resolved. And we think Councillor Box should stay because he can't do it. Can't do it. And what's his, the mealy-mouthed excuse he gave for not going to safeguarding? And that's it, well, I work. Well, I worked and was leader at the same time. Yeah, it's tough. It's just tough. I accept that. But you're getting paid. You get paid extra money. If you're not going to put the time in and do exactly what you should be doing as leader, well, stand down. Stand down. You're getting paid a few £1,000 for being leader of the opposition. And what that entails is taking your safeguarding duties seriously. That's what it entails. And you don't. You don't even ask another member of your group to go for you. And that's where I take a great exception. You've got other members of your group who actually, I know, care. I know they do. But you don't ask them to go, do you? Why not? Why not? That's rhetorical, Mr. Mayor, not I expect an answer.
Talking rubbish as usual, so basically it's absolute roaring rubbish. He's talking about making absolute political points here. No, obviously it's not, I'm not speaking to any of you, like just
point of order, Mr. Mayor. Point of order.
Absolute rubbish.
Point
That's
of
what
order.
you're talking about.
Point of order.
Point of order, right? It's point of order. So
sit down.
You're talking
Point of order.
Rubbish.
Point of order.
Point of order.
So basically you stand there,
Point of
every
order.
council bringing up the matter.
Point of order.
So that's what you do. Every council
Councillor Dean.
bringing up the matter.
Councillor Dean, let's have the point of order first, please.
I think that said everything. The point of order is this. This is leaders' questions. Ask me a question if you've got one. And actually, Mr. Mayor, it's up to you to decide. I'm sure you use all your wisdom in doing that. But if somebody's asked a set of questions once, there are probably other people wanting it. Don't let him hog the limelight.
Just wait.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to change the subject completely, if I may. I'm just taking up the point that you made about Kevin Trickett and congratulating him on his MBE. Now, I've worked with Kevin Trickett in Wakefield Civic Society for a long time, and he's done tremendous work. He leaves us all, standing in his work and his attitude and his application to Wakefield. So I'm very pleased that I've worked alongside him in Wakefield Civic Society, and I'm very pleased that he's got this honour for himself and for Wakefield. And just to touch on devolution, I'm very pleased that you've accepted the other model that will probably go forward. But again, this refers to Kevin, that he's also been chairman of the Yorkshire and Humberside Civic Society movement, and he's worked hard for Yorkshire and Humberside, and I've been lucky to be with him at meetings he's held with Yorkshire and Humberside civic societies. And I think meeting the people I've met and the active workers that I've met with the civic society, that the Yorkshire model will work, or as a chance of working, and it will release the funds that we need for Yorkshire devolution. So, you know, you've made a decision which I think is sensible. I understand your reasoning and your work for Wakefield, but, you know, let's hope we can go forward with devolution for Yorkshire. So, thank you.
It was actually the Mayor that mentioned Kevin Trickett, not me, but I do know Kevin well, and I endorse everything you say about him. I think he's a great character, and I think both he and the Civic Society in Wakefield are doing a great job. Can I say that Denise and I in particular, I know Pontefract members have spoke to the Pontefract Civic Society, and they are working very, very constructively now with us, and we are developing, if we've not already developed, a memorandum of understanding with the Civic Society in Pontefract. And you're right, Kevin does a great deal at regional level as well. In terms of devolution, I'm pleased I've pleased you. That's my mission in life, to go around pleasing people. I fail miserably on most occasions, but I do try. I mean, for my sins, I did chair the Regional Assembly for 10 years, so I know that it is possible for it to work. But I think what we've got to understand, and people I talk to agree, can one person actually run the whole of one county? I don't agree that's the case, and I think that the model that's being developed by all the 18 leaders who are working together now is on a model where the Mayor would be the spokesperson for the whole of Yorkshire, but there's as much devolution down as possible from the Mayor down to a sub-regional level. I think if you do that, then you've got a far better chance, not just of making it work, but of making it more relevant to local people. Because the people who are being left out of this at the moment, the conversation, are the public. And one of the questions that I shall be asking during these discussions, when we start meeting the ministers, is how will the public be involved? Are we actually going to move to a regional assembly format where you might get the public involved? The regional assembly in the old days used to be not just council leaders, by the way. It used to be representatives from business, from the police, from environmental groups, etc. So it was quite a broad body. And I think if somehow, without creating a huge bureaucracy, we can replicate that in some form, then that would get over some of the fears I've got about making it a very small, centralised organisation. I do thank you for your comments.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Back to devolution again. I'm supportive of the work that you're trying to do to get the best deal for Wakefield through the devolution, and to get funding for the area. The thing that I'd like a little clarification, if possible, is that because the government has predicated that we have to have a mayor now for this area, what will be the position relative to the fact that we had a referendum about mayors just a few years ago? Will we need another one?
Well, the government haven't indicated there'll be a referendum yet about that. In fact, I think they've gone further than that, said there won't be a referendum. So it's, in a sense, it's an imposition. One of the interesting points is this, that when there's a final deal being agreed by the, let's say all 20 councils in Yorkshire agree, when the final deal's been agreed, it has to come back to this council for signing off. I can't sign it off on behalf of all of us. It's got to come back here. One of the things that it is possible to do, actually, is to have our own referendum. in Wakefield in the way that Barnsley and Doncaster did. Now, they did it because they'd got a choice of models. Do you go with a Sheffield City region deal that's on the table, or do you go for a wider Yorkshire devolution deal? Now, in Barnsley and Doncaster, the overwhelming view was we go for a wider deal. So people weren't specifically asked, I believe, whether you want a mayor or not. So we've always got the option, but of course there is a cost to that. And talking of leadership, will you be standing for the UKIP leadership? No, you know me, I'm just simple. I'd heard there's going to be a vacancy soon. You might be standing because it seems to be just kind of revolving around, but it takes a turn for so long. Sorry.
Are there any more questions to Councillor Box's report? Thank you, Councillor Box. And that concludes the leader's report. Agenda item 8 is to receive written Cabinet members' reports in accordance with Council Procedure Rule 13. I will take each report in the order that they appear on the agenda. Under Council Procedure Rules, each Cabinet member is allocated 5 minutes to present their report, with up to 15 minutes to enable each Cabinet member to answer any questions or brief comments on issues within their respective portfolios. First report is from Councillor Mrs Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Moving my report, just one thing to add that I didn't have time to include in it. All of us know that people are suffering in this district from poverty, deprivation in some areas. We've had some marvellous schemes going on for regeneration. We're regenerating our towns, but there are still people living in poverty, and we try to do what we can to alleviate that. And one of the things is people living in poor housing, poor rented section housing. And it's a known fact that people living in the private rented sector, we have some good landlords, but some of them are not looking after the tenants, and we have people living in damp and squalid conditions and really struggling, and we can all talk about cases that we're trying to deal with in our own wards. So one of the things that we're doing from the strategic housing is that I took a paper to Cabinet last week which did receive a lot of interest from the media, and it's about taking enforcement against road landlords and actually imposing strong penalties against them to make sure that the houses are going to be brought up to standard. And I think that's very important that we do. We can't deal with every bit of poverty and deprivation in the area, but we can make a start. And this paper that I took to Cabinet, I feel, does make a start. So I wanted people in the area to know about it. Thank you. And I move my report.
Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor Mrs Jeffrey's report? Councillor Rowley.
Well, can I say first of all how much I welcome this action to look at private tenants, but basically the bottom line is that we need more social housing that's affordable, and I would urge the government to stop discussing it and actually allow monies to be allocated so that we can actually help those people that are currently living in homes that are privately rented and are not just up to standard. Could I just comment on page 10 about the Horizon project in Wakefield? I'd just like to say, first of all, that hopefully education is wider than people having to look to what their future profession is or work is. But I think this is a great project. What I would actually say is that, first of all, the council did have responsibility for career services in days gone by, and that responsibility has been taken from us, which I think is enormously sad. And the other thing is that I hope in recruiting these volunteers that they might also bring some money to the table, because the project has no funding. And I see that they want to expand it beyond Wakefield, but it really would be nice if the government said this is a really good project and we will try to start funding it across the country so that children can actually see opportunities within companies and agencies where they might look for future employment.
Yeah, Olivia's right. We do need more housing for rent. We need to, WDH need to build 600 houses a year up to 2021 just to meet the demand and the need. We have a partnership with WDH on Bridge Homes, and we are looking at seeing what we can do to build homes for rent, and that's something we'll do later. The Horizon Initiative, I think, is something that we should all support, but it does need funding, and we are working on that and lobbying the government to get more funding for that.
Thank you. Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Jeffrey, in your report you mentioned the local plan. I would like to firstly thank officers for the recent workshops that they put on, which will enable councillors to have an input into the plan and help shape it for the coming years. In my ward of Wakefield West, there's a current development proposal for over 250 new houses at the back of Snapethorpe Primary School, just off Lupton Estate. Many of the residents, myself and Councillor Mitchell included, have deep concerns over the proposal. Among the reasons why, we feel that the access is highly unsuitable and it would result in the destruction of high-quality playing fields, something that Sport England have objected to. My question is, would you be willing to visit the proposed site and with a view to meet with residents and listen to some of their concerns firsthand?
Thank you for that, Michael. Yes, I'm glad that you enjoyed the workshops. I think that all members need to get involved in the LDF. The LDF has been a great success in the last 5 years. It's brought massive investment to this area. Some people might think they don't want housing in their area, but it will and has made a difference to us for bringing new homes in. And I do know the area, Michael, that you're referring to, and happy to meet with the three of you or whoever you want me to meet with, see what we can do. Thank you.
Councillor Long.
Thank you. Just referring to the note on page 11, College Grove residents there do face tremendous problems in terms of very mobile population, in terms of many HMOs, in terms of large levels of antisocial behaviour. And just to acknowledge the work that the council is doing, the resources they're putting in, the time and the staff they're putting in to helping residents address that, and also to acknowledge the tremendous work being done by residents themselves. They're not just being carried along, they're putting real time and energy into improving the area where they live. So thank you.
Councillor Mrs Isherwood.
Oh, sorry.
It's already been dealt with actually by previous questions. It's about the Horizon scheme, the Inspiring Wakefield, and I think it is true that children need to be inspired from a very early age into this. I just hope it is successful. And I think we as members, if we're governors of schools at primary level, we should be encouraging schools to join up to it.
Thanks for that, Margaret. I think it's important that we do. We've got to try everything we can to work with education and business. It's not just about schooling, it's about working all together and pulling all agencies together. Thanks for that.
Okay, are there any more questions? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Moving back to the rogue landlords scheme that we're on about, are the processes in place so that if we as local councillors come across anybody who's living in under these terrible conditions, that we can report it through rather than the individuals having to take the risk of reporting through and possibly getting reactions from their landlords?
Yes, Jackie, you can report it straight through on their behalf. I've done that this week for some in my ward. And the staff, I mean, the strategic housing team are absolutely fantastic. I think they're unsung heroes. I don't think we quite appreciate and know how much they all do. And they are ready and able to get involved. And I think what we need to say about this scheme is we mean business. It's not just like a report. As the leader said when I brought it to Cabinet, it's not just a report and we put it on the shelf. Action will be taken and we need to move forward on that.
Any more questions? Thank you, Councillor Mrs Jeffrey.
Yeah. I went to the local plan workshop and discussed building in rural ward. It turns out that every single place that has been looked at for building in the ward is green belt. Is there any way that the council will look at releasing some green belt to build on in our ward?
Yeah, sorry, there's always a reluctance to build on green belt, as you know, and there have to be special circumstances. But we do recognise that under the LDF, some green belt land will have to be taken out. I think we took about 5% of green belt out in the last review. But obviously, as local members, you'll get a chance to put your input into it, object or support or whatever you feel that you want to do. But it's not that we say never in green belt, but it has to be done with caution.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Jeffrey. Next is Councillor Mrs Garbutt's report. Councillor Mrs Garbutt, would you please introduce your report to Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just in moving my report, could I just mention the Falls referral pathway? That's really working well, so we're pleased about that because it can take somebody, you know, an elderly person on an uneven floor or and end up in hospital, and you know we try to work through that process, you know, to make it easier. Also, even though it doesn't mention in my report about the connecting care hubs that went live on the 4th of December, they seem to be working very well as well. We're waiting for some evaluation to be done at this moment in time, and hopefully I'll bring that back at the next council meeting just to see. I think we're receiving quite a lot of phone calls from people who don't meet the criteria, so we're having to refer them onto different pathways to be able to get assistance that they need. So with that, Mr Mayor, I'll move my report and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor Mrs Garbutt's report?
I'd just like to make a comment on about page 16, interesting about our efforts to try and encourage people not to smoke, and yet the Freedom of Information publication yesterday highlighted how the Foreign Office is trying to encourage everyone else in the world to smoke. The British American Tobacco Company are being supported by this government. So on the one hand, we're spending millions trying to discourage people here, and abroad we're selling and encouraging cigarettes all over the place to presumably kill other nationalities. It's appalling.
I've got to agree with you, Olivia. It is, and you know, smoking is one of our main priorities on the Health and Wellbeing Board, and as I say, we'll do everything possible, you know, to encourage people to stop smoking, because it's not only the people that smoke, it's other people, it's the other family members as well that are with them in cars and homes and that type of thing on first and second hand smoke. So I think that's despicable.
I'd just like to comment on connecting care. A friend of mine suffered, an elderly friend suffered a hip fracture, and that was, you know, very speedily dealt with, very successfully dealt with in hospital, and then she's come home and she's nothing but praise for connecting care. They were on the job straight away, the service has been wonderful, so she wanted that comment to be passed on if possible.
I will pass that message on to officers concerned.
Any more questions? Thank you, Mrs Garbutt. The next report is from Councillor Mrs Rowley. Councillor Mrs Rowley, would you please introduce your report to Council?
Yes, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much. Can I first of all say that I really wish to be included in the comments made concerning my ex-colleague, ward colleague, Councillor Croxall, a leader of the council in my ward, a lovely man who did an awful lot of work and was well thought of. I've attended his funeral today, which was attended by ex-MPs, ex and current councillors, and a sizable delegation from the Asian community as well. So a big turnout, and I know his family will really appreciate all the support that they got. In moving my report. First of all, I'd like to say that you know, I think we should congratulate the progress that Rotherham has made. They were in a hell of a mess, and it's really great that they've made progress in terms of their children's services. I particularly wanted to comment on page 21 in terms of both the green paper that's being produced, that already the Association of Child Psychotherapists is saying, is saying that simply that children and young people with mental health are really going to suffer because there are not enough resources, not enough people trained, and as a result, if Mr Hunt actually transfers this service to schools, then in fact the more serious cases will not be attended to of young people. We've already got levels of suicide that are unprecedented, so I think it's really, really sad on that. In terms of my heading Zombie Academy schools, what we've actually seen is a resolution that we passed at the last meeting. We had a lengthy discussion, and not one of the points has been actually in any way responded to by government, and our regional commissioner hasn't responded either. So it certainly does seem as if it's being pushed under the carpet, and as we've seen in the Sunday papers, the academies are really sort of not only unaccountable, but I think the main point is that they're actually now squealing because of financial problems that they're going to encounter in the next few months. And I think that we've had all the publicity around Carillion, but basically in terms of 2016, so it's 18 months ago, there was a report concerning the City Multi-Academy saying that in fact it had financial irregularities and leadership problems, and yet the Department for Education did absolutely nothing about it. They just continued supporting them until it collapsed. We're now in a situation where only yesterday, I wasn't informed, but my officer was, that 6 of our schools in Wakefield are going to be taken over by Outward Grange and 2 with the Waterton Academy. But it's been a very slow process, and I understand that some funding is going to be available, but I haven't been told how much. I think it's a really unsatisfactory situation, and I am anxious that other academies might end up in the same position, and I still maintain that they're unaccountable to our community, not only to the council but the community, and certainly in my ward where City is situated, there's been, and Heathview, there's been real anxiousness about what's going to happen to those schools, a long delay in determining it, and it's been made on high, not including local politicians or the council. I move my report.
Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor and Mrs Rowley's report? Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, just to endorse and to say a couple of things about academies.
Sorry.
I fully support what you're saying about academies. I think there's a financial time bomb. But I just want to mention one word, that we're all talking about finance with school, we're all talking about that. There's one important thing, what about the children? What about their education? There's a number of those children in certain years will certainly drop behind in their education because of what's happened with YCAP. And I suspect a number of other schools are in the same position. We talk about lost generations a number of times. I think there's a potential, and I hope I'm wrong, there's a potential for a lost generation around here. And I think government should hold their heads in shame. I think they should have moved in really quickly, and I think they should be looking at this in great detail. Maybe with a little bit more common sense than what they looked at with Carillion.
Councillor Swift.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Like Councillor Shaw, I also support the comments of Councillor Rowley in relation to the multi-academy situation. I mean, as Councillor Rowley says, the announcement was made yesterday of 6 schools to Outward Grange Multi-Academy Trust and 2 to the Waterton. And as she says, they have completely disregarded all the things that we as a council said. They've disregarded our representations as a council. They've disregarded the representations from MPs and from the governing bodies. And there is no, the letters they've sent out make absolutely no reference at all to any of the representations made. That is the extent of the disregard. And in relation to what Councillor Shaw's just been saying, the financial issue, which was point 1 of the representations made by this council, was there, certainly in the case of City Academy, specifically to cover the schools, the children, the curriculum against the current pressures. Money set aside for that reason, and money that's just been lost. Well, we don't know how it's been lost, but lost in the general web of the trust. What I do want to ask Councillor Rowley, though, is that the council will actually maintain its efforts on the 4 points that were made in the November meeting. They're set out on page 7 of this agenda, and I think all 4 retain their relevance to the situation that Councillor Rowley's described and to some extent alluded to by Councillor Shaw. And that is the restitution of the money to the schools, and that is that the WCAT Trust isn't allowed to be dissolved, because it still exists, until these matters, financial and other matters, are actually resolved, and that until the actual final transfer takes place, that the government should make good the transparency gap. There's virtually no discussions worth talking about taking place with schools or anybody else on the position that's being set there. So I think my question to Councillor Rowley really is that the council should actually maintain its efforts to achieve an outcome for the decisions that we took, the demands that we made in November. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. I think it would be easy to say yes, but what we're actually seeing is something that's unaccountable. Decisions are being made somewhere else. We're not being consulted as a local authority. Certainly elected members are not. And basically the community is not being informed. So whilst I will pursue the resolution again and the points in it, it's kind of a feeling of not getting anywhere fast, because basically what we have is a totally closed agenda around academies that are not working, are going to fail in the future, are unaccountable, undemocratic, and basically are not benefiting any children throughout the country, as we can see from the statistics. And as a council, I know that we, certainly at this side, are against the whole system, but I will keep pursuing it and highlighting the shortcomings of what I believe are not benefiting the children of Wakefield.
Councillor Keith.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's on that same subject. It's the impact, though, as previous speakers have said, on the people that are doing their examinations now. This is their one-time buy and their first jump at the examination fences. And with all this going off in the background, is anybody taking account of those people? Because those are the people that are going to feel the pressures and the impacts. And when you read into Councillor Rowley's report, the fact that some of them are even arising about papers and pens and where we're going to pay things from, we talked about it in November. It's now not but just February, and we can't afford another 4 months to keep slipping by. Otherwise, these kids are going to be facing going into examinations without proper run-up to it, and without the sureties that they're going to get the backup from a teacher that might leave that school because they don't want to be associated with that. Are we doing anything about the immediacy of it? I cannot stress this too much. We've let 3 months go by and everybody seems to be saying, well, you can take it on and you can do this, and them kids are sat there not knowing what's going on.
I think that's the problem, is that the community and those of us that are sort of elected members feel that we can do something when in fact we're actually powerless because it's been taken from us. Basically the situation is that it's in some of the schools the finances leave a lot to be desired. The suppliers have stopped supplying. Some teachers have left. Some teachers need help with human resources issues, and there is concern, I know, that the curriculum may well change in some schools so that in fact pupils will be asked to transfer to a different programme for their particular subject. So yes, there's no getting away from it. Children will suffer as a result of this. But the point is that the government has prevaricated and we've had no say in that, and that's the worry. Our children are affected, we have no input into it. But I will, as I've said to Councillor Swift, keep pursuing the issues.
Councillor Jones.
Just to follow on from Kevin's comment about transparency, last Thursday, Councillor Strait, Councillor Foster and I attended West Yorkshire Pension Scheme Joint Advisory Group. I have obviously been concerned about what else was going on with regards to the financial situation. So when it came to the liability section of the pension scheme, one of the issues obviously I wanted to draw attention to was what is the state of play for staff who work for the WCAT company, and that's what it is, it's a company, about what protection there was for their pensions, particularly obviously those under the West Yorkshire. The answer came back very quickly, so clearly they were prepared for the answer, and that is it's being taken over by the government's compensation scheme for pensions, which obviously is another indicator about the sort of things which have been going on under the radar, because it's all part and parcel of the massive debts that this trust took on.
Yeah, we've got some more questions now. Councillor Isherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going on to the other section of your report, Olivia. It's the ticking time bomb of the generation gap, the mental health crisis, and it doesn't get any better. It just tells a story of young people in our district who are really suffering from mental health issues brought on by, well, various things that are happening in their lives. We have children suffering from depression. It's just a dreadful picture. But then we get help is at hand. We have a wonderful green paper coming out to solve all this. But the questions you ask are, when will it be available? How will it be funded? Do you have any idea if these questions will ever be answered?
There's no questions. Do you want to wait for there? Councillor Lund.
As a governor at Heathview, I support what Kevin was saying. I know Olivia will work very hard to do all she can to see the finances resolved, but it's not looking good. I just want to draw attention to the high numbers of pupils that are being expelled by the academies. They're very keen to get rid of their problem pupils and look to the authority to do what they can to ensure those children have a good education. It's a big strain on the authority, and whilst we will work very hard to do all we can to get those kids on a good education and to see them realise their potential, I think it should be that the academies take more interest in the pupils that aren't as easy going for them as maybe most of the pupils are. Thank you.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my question's on a completely different subject. Olivia, in your agenda page 22, commissioning a business development placement team, you mentioned independent fostering agencies. Now, I don't know whether you've seen it, but certainly over the weekend there was quite a lot of articles about independent fostering agencies. Some of them are owned by private equity funds and are being used as this way of sort of making money, and that some of the costs of these independent fostering agencies are incredibly high compared to in-house providers. Now, I don't expect you to answer immediately. First, could you let me know at some point, do we have any, do we recruit any local fosterers ourselves, or do we use all independent fostering agencies? And have you any idea of how much they do cost compared to what the cost would have been if we provided them ourselves? And thirdly, do you know who actually owns them? As I say, I don't expect the answer now, but, you know, sometime. Thank you.
Go on, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just going on to what other people have said regarding what took place when Carillion went under. I don't know whether Olivia's aware, I know Capita do a lot of work within schools, and they give a profit warning today. So I'm just wondering what would happen if we go down the same road as Carillion with the work that they may do in the schools, providing meals and cleaning and everything else, etc.
Councillor Nadine.
Yeah, agenda page 21 and Academy Schools, as it's titled. I think after last council, I think we all unanimously agreed on the resolution about Wakefield City Academy Trust. I think we should welcome the fact that Outward Grange, which is a local-based academy chain, has taken over 6 of the schools, as you mentioned, as they were under the rebrokerage programme, and also Waterton as well. But I draw your attention to it, it's not included, but I think you'll be aware that the national figures for Progress 8 were released this year. And in the last, and I think there's a wider question, it's not about, I don't think the question is about academy, it's about governance of schools, how schools are governed. And the national politicians from all parties, and this is educational people have gone through this, have been, I think, have resulted in the demise of what the education system consecutively over the years. I don't think, if you find statistically, actually, the academy chains, most good academy chains are the most successful in delivering outcomes at the moment. But I think the question we have to look at and we should be lobbying for is the wider idea of governance. I think it was one of the councillors, Councillor Lund, to raise a point of some academy chains expelling or removing pupils, and then they become the responsibility of local councils, so they become the responsibility. That does happen, and I've seen that happening across different schools. And I think that comes down to governance arrangements. So if the governors have been empowered within them schools, and I don't think the politicians are the answers, or local authorities or national politicians, the answer is the school governance arrangements, so the appeals process takes place with parent governors being there, so they can hear the story of why the pupil's been expelled. So that addresses that issue, and the governors are directly responsible for the schools. And it is going back to the governance arrangements in school that we should be lobbying for, and also going back to the Wakefield City Academy Trust and saying these answers must be given by the government. Whatever government is in place needs to be given. Imran Hussain, Bradford South MP, asked Theresa May the question. I don't think it was a suitable answer. I think you saw it on Question Time a few weeks ago. It wasn't a suitable answer. It wasn't what I'd expected to come from the government. So when something goes wrong, we need to gather around that idea, because it is children being affected. But coming back to the statistics, and this is not a government, this is a government of all parties, since the Butler Act. If you are a disadvantaged pupil in this day and age, Romani background, British white, working class, Pakistani, etc., you're unlikely to leave with the system and go to university. And if you're looked after children, you can count them in a single hand across the country. And that's been going on since the Butler Act of Free Education came into place. So the question we have to ask is it's a national question. This has been going on a number of years. I think as local councils, we've got responsibility for the children, that we're creating a generation of poor people, and that's the question we have. It's not a Conservative problem or a Labour problem. It's a whole country problem. If you look at the disadvantaged figures, Progress 8.0 is on average a child from a disadvantaged background or from the lower classes, class basis, will achieve on average 3 grades less than anybody else from a different class grouping. It's come to a class factor here, and this can only be addressed by governance arrangements within school governors. And it's not an academy or a governance issue in that sense. It's not about local authorities, but it's national government of many different types interfering with the education system and damaging children's futures.
Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's completely changing the subject again. It's agenda page 23, government legislation for school parking. This is a major issue across the district, particularly in Pontefract South and Pontefract North wards. It's a question, is the legislature in the pipeline? And if it's not, is there anything else that we can do as a council to resolve this problem?
Well, the time for questioning has now gone, so Councillor Crowley, would you like to just respond? If you wish, you can respond.
I'll just try to do it in order. First of all, the pensions issue. I mean, I think for a lot of companies that go under, and that's what we've got at the moment, are companies that own schools, I think it's a time bomb, a ticking time bomb, and there are concerns over the pensions in Carillion, and there will be worries in the future over how academies who have financial problems and are going to have less income actually ensure that particularly retired teachers receive pensions. I mean, I think that most of the retired teachers and the unions that represent them are quite concerned about it, so we will wait and see. I'm not sure of the extent of capita in Wakefield, but I will make inquiries, but certainly they do not supply our school meals. And I suppose if they do provide anything, and they provide anything to Wakefield Council schools, then we would look at the situation very much like Leeds are doing at the moment, where Carillion have not completed projects. In terms of mental health in schools, the Green Paper actually suggests that one of the teachers would take responsibility, as well as working with health workers. And at the moment, we've got a situation where I think the teachers need support because of stress. They feel under pressure. 50% of teachers are leaving the profession every year. And so to add more to their stress seems unbelievable. So I think I'm concerned that, in fact, there won't be the experts from health, and to actually create an additional teacher or give that teacher in each school the responsibility for mental health issues is, I think, something that will not work. And the whole system, as I've said in my report, is on the back burner anyway, which is a real worry because it really is a crisis amongst our young people. And remember that 50% of mental health issues are established in young people before the age of 15, so it's a real concern. In terms of exclusions, yes, in the last 3 years, 195 pupils have been excluded from our schools. Some have been found places in other schools, which now that we've got a situation where 3 of our secondary schools will be part of the Outwood Academy, Outwood was excluding, and those 3 schools were receiving some of those children. So the worry is, where will they go? But we've got a situation also in which we are trying to provide as much accommodation as possible for children that are excluded, and that's become a real issue. We normally at this time of year start to have a slight increase in exclusions. This year it started in September, and we've had an increase of 44 children that have been excluded from schools, and we're desperately trying to find places to educate them outside the school system. A real worry to us. In terms of fostering, the problem we've got, I was talking to, we had an open session yesterday with the public about where we should give priority, and it was quite interesting. There was about 25 people turned up, but we had a worthwhile discussion. And one of the issues was that, being a councillor for a very long time, I can reminisce. And what I would actually say is that when I was a younger councillor, we ran our old people's homes, and all the research would indicate that old people now would prefer to be in council-run homes. And basically, the homes were privatised, or people set up new homes. And when they did, they had people that they got to pay the profit to, that had invested in those homes or bought shares. And we've got exactly the same situation now with fostering and adoption, in that we can't afford to pay the amount that the private companies are paying, but they're costing us a fortune. And so the average weekly fee paid in 2016 for independent agencies for placing vulnerable children with families was £759, compared to the average that councils pay, which is £396. So would you believe, first of all, those that foster look to the private companies, and the private companies in turn, because we're desperate to find places, are charging us phenomenal amounts of money. And that money, in part, makes profit that goes to pay their dividends. And I think in a previous report, I've highlighted that it's costing 40 million a year in terms of the monies that are being charged. A big expense. I can give more detail to Councillor Mitchell, but it's a real concern that what we have is actually the privatisation of the care of our most vulnerable children. Can I just say, yes, I would agree that sort of the education system should be for everyone, and it's become more class-orientated than it's ever been. And I believe that the curriculum, as it's become narrower, does not deal with the children that are not necessarily geared to academia. And we need a much bigger debate about education. Finally, in terms of parking, we could look at sort of how we could restrict parking in all our schools. And that would be a very costly procedure for the council, when in fact what's actually the case is that it's the problem not only in Wakefield but across the whole country, that parents are polluting their children and damaging them by parking outside schools. And as a result, the government could actually take legislation that would be a blanket effect across the whole country. And what we need is not only the legislation, but we also need the finances to ensure that it can be acted upon. And something we ought to take back to government and ask them to actually look at the dangers that are being created. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Rowley. Next is Councillor Shaw's report. Councillor Shaw, would you please introduce your report to Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In moving my report, I'd just like to draw attention certainly to the registration services, Mr Mayor. As you can see on page 26, things are obviously changing, and people aren't necessarily just getting married either in church or in the side registration office. They're looking for something different, and the registration services recognise that. And I'm sure that if people go in the town hall, but then in Pontefract Town Hall, out there in the 5 towns, they'll see that they're providing this service. So I think it's well done to them, and it's growing, and I'm sure it will grow even more. Also, I think well done to the electoral services team. This is important. It's important on two positions. One is to keep people on the register who are on it now, and I think they've been quite successful in doing that. But actually to get out there and to make sure that people do register to vote. I know it's a big thing. I know we've talked about youth, but it isn't just about youth. It's about a number of different levels. So they have been doing some of the pilots. They have been quite successful, and it's not where we'd like it to be, and I'm sure they'd agree with that, but it's going in the right direction, so well done. With that, move my report.
Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor Shaw's report? Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Moving on, Councillor Spate, would you please introduce your report to Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In highlighting the report, I'd just like to pick out a couple of items from that. And the first is the Council's investment of over 700,000 in Sandal Castle to carry out conservation repair works. This will make the castle accessible and safe once again. It's a very important historic monument, and also, I would add, a much loved one. So I'm delighted that this council is demonstrating its commitment to preserving that monument for future generations. And secondly, it's just a reminder really, the council's award-winning Food, Drink and Rhubarb Festival takes place on the 23rd, 24th and 25th of February. It's in its 12th year and it's growing from strength to strength, and I just want to urge everyone to go along, take the families and have a great time. Thank you. My report.
Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor Spate's report? Next is Councillor Mrs Cummings' report. Councillor Mrs Cummings, would you please introduce your report to Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of things I want to highlight. The basis of the report this time is around the fabulous volunteers that we have across the district. Volunteers that are looking after our parks and gardens, volunteers that are updating our street furniture in the city centre, and volunteers who are working in youth services. And without these volunteers, we couldn't run some of our services. So I wanted to pay tribute within my report to all the fantastic volunteers across the district. The second thing I wanted to mention, Mr Mayor, last Saturday was International Holocaust Day, and I'm really, really pleased, Mr Mayor, that you and Deputy Mayor went along to support that initiative in the cathedral. But I especially want to thank Stuart for going, and on my behalf, I was ill and I couldn't go, and he jumped in at the last minute, so I particularly wanted to thank Stuart. I just want to touch on fly tipping, if I may, and urge everybody to report it. I was going down the Eastern Relief Road this morning and came across a chap that was up on the pavement carrying some what looked like tree shavings down and dumping them down the other side. So I stopped the car, I hasten to add, picked the phone up and I reported it. The sad thing about it really is that when I got a call back about 11:30, the chap was actually delivering some trees that his company was actually going to plant on the Eastern Relief Road. But I felt so good up to that point. But yeah, it was one of our contractors. But I would urge, I mean, that is a funny thing. But I would urge, if anybody does actually see anything, to report it straight away. We're having some absolutely fantastic prosecutions and fines around fly tipping. So with that, I move my report.
Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor Cummings' report? Councillor Isherwood.
I'd like to support Maureen on what she's saying about the volunteers. I've experienced it in Featherstone firsthand with our fabulous soon-to-be War Horse Memorial and the equally fabulous Roger Parkinson fetched all these people and they planted all the 353 trees, put the markers down, painted them, and all the soldiers have all got the names on. So you can see Featherstone's a glowing ember in a sea of toxic waste, what we talk about. Featherstone's always there, as they are at the rugby, of course. And I'm pleased that Councillor Box mentioned that they beat the under-16s, and we didn't just beat them, we absolutely thrashed them. But the only downside was, of course, that we had to play at the jungle, and those delicate souls aren't used to going to backward places like that. It must be like playing in some terrible place. Come to Featherstone and have a look and see how it's done, and you won't be having all these conversations and shouting at each other, who's going to do this and who's going to do other. Come to Featherstone, we do it ourselves.
Councillor Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Maureen, page 38 sees vehicles involved in waste crime. I'm really pleased, in fact I'm ecstatic that the authority is using this power to seize these vehicles and trailers who are caught fly tipping. But my worry is, what happens when they are not caught? I've had a number of reports of fly tipping in my ward, and I presume it's the same for all members in their wards. And the first thing we do is phone street scene to get help removing the waste. Well, then I believe we'll get the same answer as I did, which is, if it's not private land, we cannot help you. Try the environment. What I cannot understand is why we cannot help them. These private landowners must pay council tax and rates, and they are the victims of this crime, not the perpetrators. So why should they have to pay to remove the rubbish? With all due respect, Maureen, I think this problem should be looked at to find a fair result. Now that we are using this new power. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Tish, I wish we had a lot more Rogers across the district. I really, really do. I'm not going to touch on the Rugby League. Up the train, we're going to be top of the league this year. Wilf, yes, thank you. And it is. When people dump on private land, there's absolutely nothing we can do about it unless there is rodents or infestations within it. Then we can get onto environmental health and get it shifted. But if it is on private land, what we normally do is find a landowner, write to them and ask them to clear it up, which is not always possible because you don't know who the landowner is or whatever. It is a blight across the whole of the district. In fact, it's a blight across the whole of the country. We do clear up where we can. We did reinstate the fly tipping service, so that does make it a lot easier for us when it is that we can actually go out there and get it out of public land. And with regard to seizing vehicles, I nearly had that one seized this morning. But anyway, yeah, it is another piece of our armour that we can actually use to actually combat fly tipping across the whole of the district, whether it be on private land or public land. But I understand your frustrations.
Councillor Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Maureen, I'd like to comment on what you've wrote about retail crime. on page 41. It's an issue close to my heart. I've been in retail for 45 years, and during the last 10 years, I've had I've had two knife attacks and a snatch and grab. I'm a member of Retail Federation of News Agents, and they have 15,000 active members, and they look after about 45,000 news agent shops. If you look on their the books that they carry for things that they refuse, the refusal book, you'll find a lot of incidents in there where it doesn't look to be serious crime, but it actually is. And it got to a point where we're being encouraged to even report a Mars bar at 65 pence being stolen. Well, it sounds ridiculous, but on the 6th of January this year, there was an incident in London where a 49-year-old shop owner was fatally injured. He was trying to protect his shop from being smashed up. One of his colleagues had actually refused to sell a 36 book of Rizzler papers. It is an issue that really does need looking into. We've tried to get the Crime Commissioner to come and speak to us. He sent a representative to talk to us, but he came, and the issue and the delegates that were present at that meeting came from all over Yorkshire. We didn't just need one Crime Commissioner, we need them all to get together to get something done about this. It really is a serious, serious issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Maureen, I'd just like to say from Ward 7 members is to pass on our thanks to our street scene team who have done a fantastic job over our ward since the beginning of December. The fly tipping has just got out of hand again, and it's not only on the public bypass, and I know somebody put it in press last week about the bypass of Main Road, but I'm talking about off-road, which has been a disaster area, and it's every day nearly they have to now send a message to our team. So just a thanks for the fast response and for all the work we're doing. Even though we've had our cuts, our team are doing a fantastic job.
Thank you, and I think everybody across this chamber would agree with that. We do respond and react as quickly as we can to, and I know you were talking to me yesterday about, the trouble is you go out running every day and look for it. But I do understand that the bypass road is becoming a particular issue, and we talked about some initiatives that we can do down there. But the street scene do an absolutely fantastic job, I believe, in trying against all odds to keep our district clean and clear, and Andy's here, I'm sure he'll pass that on.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Cummins. The final Cabinet member's report is from Councillor Morley. Councillor Morley, would you please introduce your report to Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I will be brief. Can I just draw Council's attention to page 43, development of major transport schemes in the district. I'm quite proud when I look at the amount of schemes we've got coming forward in the next couple of years, Mr Mayor, to support the economic development of this district, to make sure the people are keeping moving there. It really is fantastic. We can well say that we're getting our pounds worth of money out to the combined authority, so I really do appreciate the time and effort that officers are putting in to make these schemes. And just lastly, on page 48, I'm pleased to see that the Castlewood to Wakefield Greenway is coming on nicely. I get first-hand accounts of how well it's coming on from Councillor Wassell, who's been inspecting it daily. So with that, Mr Mayor, I move my report. Thank you.
Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor Morley's report? Nick, you don't.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I can only speak for the community groups in Ossett. I just want clarification, basically, Councillor Morley, if this is true. Why are volunteer groups in Ossett, such as Building Ossett Better, Ossett Town Centre Partnership, Love Ossett and Civic Trust, etc., are being increasingly challenged when trying to organise events? It is reaching the stage where costs of overcoming these obstacles will mean the events will no longer be held. The town will suffer as a consequence because businesses rely on the footfall. As it stands now, many businesses in Ossett are struggling. The latest example is traffic management. We are led to believe that any road events need to be managed by private traffic management consultants, and these costs are in excess of £2,500 per event. This will affect the Beer Cart Festival, the Maypole procession and the coal race in Gawthorpe. These costs cannot be met. Other examples are charging £25 per vehicle admin fee to access the precinct at events. This means our classic car event is now cancelled. Business is hard in the small towns and Wakefield District Council seem intent on shutting Ossett down completely despite the fantastic efforts of the community groups to undertake initiatives to improve matters. I just want clarification if that is the case, Councillor Moore. Thank you.
Yeah, he's up for election. It's always been the case when you apply for a road closure, you have to put some sort of in there to make sure the roads are closed safely, to make sure there's no accident. That's always been the case. So you're quoting £2,500, don't know where you're getting that from whatsoever on that one. The £25 for the classic car show, don't know what you mean by that. Last year, we, for the first time, a private individual had a classic car show in Wakefield City Centre. It wasn't £25 a car in there, so I don't know where that's coming from whatsoever. So, it's quite truthful. I'm going to have to go back and find out a bit more, because what you're saying there is not my understanding. There's many, many events go off. There's many, many events. It was the same with Remembrance Day parades. It's always been the case you've had to have road closures, what is the cost of that, and then put some sort of management company in there to manage it. So I'll go back and I will get you a full response on that.
Thank you. Just to go along with what my colleagues said, yes, we've been told we have to have a professional traffic management. We can't do it ourselves. We've got to have a professional traffic management company to do it. And for the Maypole, they've been quoted £3,500. And the other one about £25 per car. This is with anything that we're going to have on in the precinct in the future, when there are vans that come on selling burgers, etc., or cars coming on with other things when they come on and they might run to the side of the stalls. Every vehicle that stays on the precinct is going to have to pay £25, and that's what we've been told. The whole thing is just getting totally out of hand. We were also told that everything, all the forms and everything, had to be in 6 months in advance.
Where's it all? Who's telling you all this? Which officer? Right. What I think the Ossett. Can I ask the Ossett members, all three of you, and whatever parties you are, can you get yourself together? We'll have a meeting over this and let's discuss it, because I'm not aware of any of this. I can understand why the council would charge a burger van to go in a city centre, a rent. That's common sense. A classic car show charge for each individual is different, I would say that. I think we need to, well, let's get a meeting and find out where we're going with this. Thank you.
Councillor Mesterman.
Thank you for that, Matthew. But it is these traffic management companies are sort of exploiting the organisations, because they're just bumping the prices up, because they know that the organisations have to have their traffic management, and there's only a few companies, so it's just costing more and more for events that people enjoy, and they're just not able to do it. So I'd appreciate a meeting, yeah.
Councillor Isherwood.
We used to have to, it used to be the police that always did the traffic management for our galas, whatever. Well, now the police refuse to do it. So we have to have it legally. We have to have a traffic management. So we have to get a person to do it, because the police now refuse to do it. So that's the way that we looked at it. I mean, we don't want to pay a traffic management company either when we do a gala, but it's something that we've got to do, because you say to the policeman, I don't know police authority, Alan, you know, we're having a gala, can you come, can you monitor it, can you look after it, stop traffic and do this and do that, as you do with parades, we know, with little ones in and what have you. No, the police want nothing to do with it, so therefore, but to actually do the parade and have it done, you've got to, by law, legally, you've got to have it traffic managed. That's hence why the traffic management is. But you're right, they're blackmailing you, because they know we've got the whip hand. So it's either do it or don't do it, as far as we're concerned anyway.
Councillor Wassell.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
it isn't just Ossett that's having this issue. Clearly you've marched from Altofts on the Normanton Gala Parade, and you've seen how many junctions and major roads we have to cross and traffic lights we have to get through from Altofts to Normanton in a safe manner. And yes, we have to pay a traffic management company to manage those roads, put road closure signs out. We put signs out in advance of the event, at least a fortnight, telling the public that roads will be closed. We try to have a rolling road block so that all the roads aren't closed for the hours that it takes us to walk from Altofts to Normanton. When we have the light switch on in Normanton, it's in the precinct, it's a pedestrian precinct. We have to have a traffic management scheme in place to stop any rogue drivers driving down the precinct while we've got kids, Santa's sledge and reindeer and rest of it, trying to enjoy the switch on. Remembrance Day, we have to employ a traffic management scheme company to get us from wherever we set off to two cenotaphs, because we do Normanton and Altoft cenotaphs on Remembrance Day. So it's nothing new that traffic management schemes have to be in place. The newness is who's paying for it. We are having to pay for it in Normanton, Featherstone clearly are having to pay for it there, and you seem to walk up to the fact that you're now having to pay for it in Ossett.
Mr. Mayor, I think we're well versed now with traffic management schemes. Yes, Highways grants them, and then we have to have a company to put them in place. We've always known that. The police used to do it free of charge. They can't do it anymore. That's why we had a lot of problems with Remembrance Day celebrations. We will leave the Ossett debate. We will meet with local members and find out more about the Classic Car Show, £25, and obviously we can talk about the management company. Thank you.
Councillor Keith.
Yeah, finally, Mr. Mayor, I've done quite a number of these over the years, as you know. They've always been there, as Councillor Wassell says, but it's just that they've been done for naught, as Councillor Morley just pointed out. But if you don't get them done, it nullifies your insurance. It's the knock-on effect. If you haven't taken reasonable precautions, your insurance is out of the window, and it's the first thing they'll back out on. Plus the fact you've got to look at, if you're not going to willingly prepared to do this in nowadays, not that you want this to happen in our country, but there's been numerous events throughout the world where there have been tragic accidents because they haven't people driving vehicles. So you've got to consider all eventualities, and a traffic management plan is one of them.
Thank you. We're just about timed out on this now, but I've got Councillor Taylor wants to say something. I think. Thank you, Councillor Morley, and that concludes the Cabinet members' reports. Agenda item 9 is to consider and note a report on integrated care for adults across Wakefield, which was approved by Cabinet in November. Is a report moved?
I move the report, Mr. Mayor.
Is the report seconded?
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any questions in relation to the report? Any comments? All in favour of the recommendation? Any against? Any abstentions? That is carried. Need to get my teeth in for this one. Agenda item 10 is to consider and agree a report seeking approval for the submission of a Stage 1 Townscape Heritage funding application to the Heritage Lottery Fund for the Upper Westgate area. Is the report moved? Is the report seconded? Seconded, Mr. Mayor. Are there any questions in relation to the report? Councillor Isherwood.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'm pleased with this, Denise. It's because Westgate actually has some beautiful buildings on Westgate, which have, and I refer to agenda page 64, 513, Though the historic integrity of Westcott is maintained by the survival of historic buildings and yards, it is negatively affected by a number of issues which are placing its buildings under pressure. These relate to the use of the buildings for the nighttime economy, owners and tenants' failure to implement repairs and maintenance, heavy traffic and lack of diversified end users. What guarantee do we have that the owners of these buildings that have caused this, in my opinion, decay to them, what guarantee do we have that they will actually take part and make sure that the buildings are kept in a suitable state?
We should make sure that they do, Margaret. I mean, this is a great opportunity for them, and they really would be very foolish if they didn't accept this. We've had successes in other areas and it's worked, and we shall do our best to make sure it does.
Any comments? All in favour of the recommendation set out in the report? Any against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Agenda item 11 is to consider a report seeking approval to adopt the Wakefield District Residential Design Guide as a supplementary planning document. Is the report moved? Is the report seconded? Are there any questions in relation to the report? Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very detailed report, and I'm pleased on page 160 that the advises that garages are designed for a modern family car for people to be able to get in and out of both sides. I'm very pleased of that. Just a comment, and I don't know if I've missed it, but I would have liked to have seen something in there about good broadband connection when developers are designing new developments and whatever, that people are given a choice whether they've got the cable or the dish or whatever, the cable can be put in while they're doing the infrastructure. I might have missed it, but I couldn't see it, but I would welcome that, because I think good broadband and that is a necessity in this modern day that we live in.
Yeah, thank you for that, Martin. I think a lot of developers and that start to do that now, but I will bring that forward. I think really we need to crack on, because we've got people in the gallery waiting to hear the debate, and you know, we're taking a lot of time up with questions that perhaps we can answer later.
Councillor Keith.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think we're looking at this. It's a good report, like Martin has said. In our ward, we get quite a lot of developments, and one of the things that we have issues with normally is the good neighbour policy, that when you're constructing these things, that you look after the site and clean up after yourself, rather than leave mud on the road, etc., etc., and working at all hours got sense and making noise and that. So I'd like to see some more enforcement on that, but I welcome the report.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Councillor Johnson says, it's a good report. I was just a little disappointed on one point, though, with the question of off-road parking, which isn't better covered. And the guide just refers to the street design guide from 2012. Now, parking is a problem across the district, and the new roads are often built to the minimum width required for the traffic flows. Now, for new developments, a garage is counted as an off-road parking space, but I doubt if as many as 1 in 10 of these is used for that purpose, because the room sizes in these new houses are generally small and there's little storage space, so the garages are used for purposes other than parking. So in approving the guide document in its present form, I would suggest that the accompanying street design guide is reviewed, because otherwise we're creating a problem for the future years. Thank you.
Thank you on that. Actually, we are going to look at that. We have accepted that.
Are there any comments? All in favour of the recommendation? Any against? Any abstentions? Agenda item 12 is to deal with any questions made by members on this occasion. No questions have been submitted. The final agenda item is to deal with any motions proposed by members. The final agenda item is to deal with any motions proposed by members in accordance with Council Procedure Rules, as set out in the Constitution. I have agreed to a request from Councillor Tully to alter his motion to include some additional wording. A copy of the altered motion has been made available to all members. Councillor Tully, would you please move your motion to Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I rise to support this motion, and the actual motion which is in front of everybody is quite self-explanatory. And if anybody has got any difficulties or problems with it, well, they'll have every opportunity, I've no doubt, as we proceed to give the reasons as to why. But I think we need to ascertain straight away why are we under pressure. And it's now 4:45, and we've been here since 2 o'clock, and there isn't a debate or a conversation that we've not had in this building today, in this chamber today, that talks about pressures on this authority. Whether it's policing, whether it's the emergency services, whether it's anything that we might need to be dealing with. And I'm not going to make any excuses, but this issue of winter pressures is a political choice. I made that quite clear to the opposition in this chamber today, and the reason why I asked for the additional wording to be placed on this motion, because I think it's incumbent that Jeremy Hunt should no longer be the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. He's the only guy that goes in for a job interview that supposedly goes in to get the sack and comes out with another addition to his portfolio. And let me just say this: social care in this country and in this county is a national scandal, aided and abetted by a Tory government's consistency with shrinking the state. That's what it's all about. It's about shrinking the state. And they are responsible, and social care difficulties are responsible for the resolution that's in front of us today, or at least 50% of it. We have got people in hospital 3 and 4 weeks after they should have been discharged because they ain't got nowhere to go, because we ain't got any more social care beds, or very little social care beds, or what social care beds we've got have been privatised. And I don't say this anecdotally, I say this from experience. I say this really from experience. The resolution also talks about staff pressure. The finest asset in the NHS is the people that work in it. And as soon as this government wakes up to understand that, they'll understand why we've got difficulties within the NHS. We've got members of our staff working excessive overtime for no pay, working long hours for no pay. And this government knows full well they do it because they play on their loyalty and their commitment to the job and their vocation that they're in. And it's a disgrace. Across this county, there is over 330 vacancies in the NHS, in nursing positions alone. And nationally, 34,000 vacancies. And you've asked yourself the question, why? When people are going to work at 6 o'clock in the morning and getting home at 8:30 at night, and they've not even had as much chance to sit down and have a cup of tea or take a break. And that's what's happening. Young people barely out of training, with responsibilities in ward, making life and death situations, and every day the life that at work, they're concerned about that pin that they desire because it makes them members of the MMC and being under threat all the time in case they make a mistake. That cannot continue. That is why we have got winter pressures, and that's why we've got difficulties within this health service, and it's got to change. On the 10th of January, 68 consultants, not carbonistas, 68 eminent consultants who dedicated their lives, their working lives to the NHS, wrote to the Prime Minister about winter pressures. And I tell you what, the government have got the fingers that far inside their ears they can scratch the cheeks up inside because they're not prepared to listen, and they don't listen. And that's the difficulty we've got. And we've got them preoccupied with personalities and preoccupied with Europe and preoccupied with anything else, while our people in NHS, our people, the people that we represent, are treated like cattle. Putting broom cupboards at Wakefield, supposed to be putting cupboards at Wakefield laid on trolleys for hours upon end, all in the name of a modernised NHS service. And we've got them pontificating up and round the country because they're more interested in taking this country out of Europe. I know that's for a different debate, but that's what we are. That's why it's political, because it's political. It's as political as the air that we breathe, and it's as political as the water that we drink. But the difficulty that we have is this. If you go back 20 odd years, 30 years into other industries in this part of the world, you continue to demoralise staff, treat them with contempt, they'll walk. We have got people walking out of the NHS today at the age of 40. They can go and work elsewhere, and it's happening across the teaching professions as well, because it's all about this road towards privatisation. And Noam Chomsky, the great American historian, has said it, and it's happened in my industry, and there's people in this room, Grump and Continent. You demoralise people long enough till they turn around and say, well, we may as well privatise it because it's better than, it can't be no worse than the situation that we're already in. And that is the difficulty, and that is what's happening in our NHS today. This government has only got one agenda, and it's in their DNA. They have got no more interest in the NHS, fit for purpose, from cradle to the grave, like us, especially at this side of the chamber, have always been proud to support and to march behind. But I tell you what we need to do. We've got to stop them. We've got to campaign. We've got to demonstrate. And we've got to take to the seat, because I tell you this now, this isn't about privatisation through back door or side door, it's coming through front door. Today as we speak, I know full well at Pontefract Hospital, on a 20-bedded ward, we are now carpeting 5 cubicles with separate menus to make this private work on that particular NHS ward in elective surgery. There is no elective surgery goes off at Pontefract today, on a weekend, unless it's private work. That has got to stop. That creeping privatisation through side door, that's privatisation full on. And I would ask this council today to fully come behind this resolution, to support the resolution, and to call on the Prime Minister, first of all, to get shut of an inept, useless Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, and let's looking at funding, because it is about political choice, and it is, the money is available. We're talking about millions and billions of pounds this country is going to spend on coming out of Europe, and it's not about whether we vote to stay or whether we vote to leave. The money is there. If there's a will, we can use it. And the only way we're going to do it is we've got to make sure, because I'm sick to death of hearing him talking about mid-staffs. We keep going back to mid-staffs, and we've got nothing but, difficulties with manning up. Well, I'll tell you this now. There are people going to work every day in the NHS, people that we represent, in fear of their jobs, in fear of the jobs and fear of mistakes that they're likely to make because of the situation that they find themselves in, under intense pressure. And these people are entitled to some dignity, are entitled to a life, and are entitled to come home from work and look after the children and do what the rest of us take for granted. Please support the resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Tully. Is the motion seconded?
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Eyre, in seconding the motion, do you wish to formally speak now or reserve your right to speak until later in the debate?
I'll reserve my right. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Does any member wish to speak on the motion? May I remind members that speeches must be directed to the question, under the discussion, or to a personal explanation or point of order. Councillor Garvey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Our local NHS services, particularly our hospitals, have been facing huge pressures this winter and continue to face high demand for A&E services. Over 4,000 people a week have been attending A&E across Mid-Yorkshire hospitals at Pinderfields, Pontefract and Dewsbury. The majority attend Pinderfields Hospital. Almost 1 in 4 people attending A&E will be admitted to hospital, putting huge strain on beds across our hospitals. The high demand puts pressures on social services as we do our best to support the hospitals by helping to get people home and to receive care and support in the community. The hospitals have to open extra beds this winter to cope with the demand, but they do not have the extra staff to support such high demand. Shortages of nurses and staff and doctors right across the NHS has been a big impact on our hospitals. That's why we need a properly funded long-term plan for the NHS and social care. We know that it's not just hospitals that are suffering, primary and local GPs are the backbone of our NHS. The Council is working hard to support the NHS at this difficult time. We have put more social care staff into our hospitals and our connecting care hubs are pioneering a new approach to supporting people in the community. But this will not solve the national crisis and the government need to act now. Our citizens deserve the very best care and our staff deserve to feel supported and valued in the vital work they do. I personally want to thank those staff for doing so. I've got to say, if you are one of those 4,000 people who will need our A&E services this week, for you, a parent or a child, you want to know that the very best care will be available. We want to protect the NHS now and into the future. I support this motion.
Councillor Hemingway.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wish to speak in support of this important motion. Since the Conservatives came into power, the NHS has suffered the worst financial settlement in its history. Ever since its inception in 1948, successive governments, but particularly of the Labour variety, have tried to match NHS funding to demand. It's a logical premise for a functioning health service that funding should match the needs of people. However, this generation of Conservatives is increasing NHS funding by as little as 1% a year, when demand is rising at over 4%, and in some areas 10%. To be frank, it's an outrage. Every year, the NHS funding gap widens and many trust budgets are now firmly in the red. The Tories claim to be giving the NHS increases may be factually true in an abstract sense, but it's completely disingenuous. Under the last Labour government, NHS funding rose by over 4% a year and there were record levels of patient satisfaction. Under this government, the NHS has gone backwards as funding has fallen and free market profiteers have been allowed to leech from our health service. We already have a lower number of beds per thousand population than many European countries, having lost in the region of 14,000 since the Conservatives' 2012 Social Care Act, and the folly of assuming that preventative community services can replace these losses has been exposed by the shortages of this terrible winter crisis. We've had patients waiting in hours in ambulances and in hospital corridors, elective operations cancelled and delayed, waiting lists growing, and a worsening picture in many trusts, including Mid-Yorks. These are not just statistics, these are people's lives, it's people's health, it's people's futures, and we need to do more. 68 senior consultants writing to the government to say that the picture needs more funding and it's totally unacceptable. The government has to listen. This is our NHS, it's our taxes that fund it, it's our families that use it, and it is our duty to defend it. Please support the motion.
Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try not to repeat what's been said already in terms of this motion, but if we start off from the premise that in the terms of austerity, the National Health Service was told that they had to actually take cuts of £20 billion. That's where we started from, and where we ended up now is a position where the underfunding is crisis. And we all agree in this House, and I support it, in terms of the staff do a wonderful job. The pressures they're on is tremendous, and it continues daily. And the change in the shift patterns hasn't helped when they're having to go in under such pressure and stress, and they're working 12-hour shift days, 12 hours under that kind of stress. Now, we have discussed and given some figures here about A&E. We've all seen what's happened over the winter period. Winter periods have always had a pressure on the health service, and they plan in advance for so many beds. It's normally been about 50 beds in advance to deal with winter pressures. This year, because of other pressures, there has been this outrage of people having their operations cancelled, people suffering in pain and agony, who've already waited 12 to 18 months, have had their operations cancelled. Now we're in a position where not only are we dealing with privatisation, as Councillor Tully has said, through the back door, we are having it through the front door. And there's lots of things going on in terms of the NHS and NHS England and Mr Hunt that aren't getting the publicity that they should, letting the public know what is happening, such as the accountable care organisations. The accountable care organisations is deemed to be any care provider out there who can meet the criteria set down by the government. And those accountable care organisations can, through procurement, maybe even one organisation, take on the clinical demands of the trusts, and then they can actually sublet to other providers, such as Richard Branson of the world. Amazon now, you've seen in America, who brought out this system, are actually, Amazon now are in partnership in America to provide health service care. This government here is mirror imaging what's happened over there. They actually went to get some experience of it, because all that's happening here is privatisation through the front door. We have a situation where we have GPs whose status within the new structure of the accountable care organisations will have their independence put at risk. We have organisations that are still going on looking at this accountable care organisation, which is privatisation up front. And not only that, we are not being told, and it's been one of the issues that perhaps the Health and Wellbeing Board should be investigating, is that trusts have got together and they have set up a West Yorkshire Trust arm's length company. We want to be knowing what this arm's length company is going to be doing. The accountable care organisation, in fact, has been challenged by breaking a rule, and it is going to, the judges have given permission for 2 judicial reviews to take place on this particular issue, one led by Professor Stephen Hawkins. This is how bad this government has got. At the moment, Jeremy Hunt has supposedly indicated that the flow of services and the plans for this privatisation through these accountable care organisations has got to stop. It's got to stop because under the Act he has failed to consult nationally with the public and wanting to do it through the back door. We have got to make it plain that the services in the NHS that are being put under pressure through austerity plans with cuts in budgets, we've got to make it plain as well. The NHS belongs to the people of this country, not the privateers who want to get in and have rich pickings. It belongs to this country. The people have a right to be consulted. And I guarantee you this, and if I have the role of scrutiny, I will. I will certainly challenge what the government's intent is on what they will call a national consultation. Because normally what they do, Mr Mayor and members here will know, they push it under the carpet so low that people can't know what's going on. Now it's time we knew what was going on in there. We have the health of our residents, we have the health of the country in the hands of people who A, don't know what it is to be on a waiting list, who can afford to go elsewhere, and who are deeming that our National Health Service which is the gem of this country and the envy of the world, becomes an American private contractor's dream to strip it of its services that people need and to make profit and profiteers in their bank. I certainly will move and support this motion to my dying breath. I've worked in the health service 20 years. I have seen different motions. I have seen different attacks. I have seen different reviews. What's going on with this government is not what is in the interest of the National Health Service of this government, Mr. Mayor. I move.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to rise in support of this motion and share a little story. So over the Christmas period, a friend of mine had quite a serious surgery done in October. So some complications over Christmas arose from that surgery, which resulted in them not being able to walk, so they lost their mobility. Unfortunately for them, they did it while they were walking on stairs. So they managed to get themselves to a safe place. But what happened then is, because all the ambulances were stuck at A&E waiting to get patients in there, never mind, you know, discharged off of them, just out of the back of an ambulance, he had to wait for 12 hours, sat on a set of stairs after complications from surgery. These are not just statistics, these are real people. So the ambulance came and they, you know, they did the best they could for him. But the stories they were telling us when they were there is that people are phoning 999s because they have got urgent cases, and obviously they're triaged there. So they decided, yes, your case is urgent, but not as urgent. So what they're doing is waiting 9 hours, and a lot of these people are vulnerable, elderly people who are finding themselves getting woken up by the ambulance service in the middle of the night, who they've had to leave the door open for just to get treated. And we hear from, you know, front bench at government, we hear that the NHS has more funding than ever before, and it is simply not true. It is such a fabrication of the numbers to make it look like there's some sort of supportive to the NHS in some way. And this government should hang its head in shame, because they are showing a health service that is so precious to each and every one of us here absolute contempt. And I support this motion, and you know, I hope everybody will.
Councillor Kitchen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Without repeating too much of what's already been said, I would like to say it anyway. This year we celebrate 70 years of the NHS, which saw an ending to the hard-working families that suffered ill health because they couldn't afford to pay for their care. And it's changed the lives of many. It became the envy of the world and still is. But what is wrong is how the private health companies have been allowed to put profits before people. We only have to look at Carillion to see what fairness private against public can do. The NHS, our NHS, is in crisis. Closure of hospital services, staff shortages, not enough doctors, nurses, operations postponed, but yet this government insists they are giving extra money to this NHS when clearly it is in a state of neglect. The last thing our country needs is a health service that is neglected to the point that people are left on trolleys, parked up ambulances because no one to attend to them and there's no beds. Us on this side, we care. We care about the people we represent, and we cannot stand by and let privatisation creep in, whether it's through the back door, the side door or the front door. The answer is in the title, National Health Service, free to the point of delivery, our jewel in the crown. It is not up for negotiation. Stop the neglect, give it what it needs, the right person for the NHS. I definitely 100% support this motion. But most of all, I would like to thank all our doctors, nurses and everybody that are, under all these struggling times that are being put before them. I hope that things will change and they do get the help that they so desperately need. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I would like to agree with Councillor Tully that the funding is the main problem here. I fully agree with him on that. And I also agree with his concerns about the privatisation issues. There's just one point I would raise, though. It's in connection with this extra
item that's been added that we've just seen. It raises the question, if they sack Jeremy Hunt, that means that someone else will replace him. And are we convinced that the person who will replace him will be any better than Jeremy Hunt? Which... The more serious point is, if they make a change, will this in effect damage the service if you get a change of management? Because you may not get a change of effect, but there will be disruption to the health service. So that is why I have some reservations about this final point.
Catherine, do you want to speak, Catherine?
I'm sure everyone in this room has used the NHS at some time or another and needed the help of the hard-working surgeons, consultants, doctors and other members of staff within the NHS. I, for one, personally have to thank those hard-working staff because in recent years they've saved the lives of both my husband, my daughter and my grandson and continue to help them live their lives. But if things carry on as they are within this NHS and the Tories privatise it like they are doing, chipping away bit by bit, privatising this service, privatising that service until the whole of the NHS is privatised, then I regret to think what would happen because in 1948, when the NHS came in, my grandmother was still paying £6 a week from when her son had died in 1942 for the doctors. So 6 years after he died, she was still paying to the doctors for his treatment. And this will happen again if we don't fight these Tories to help save this NHS. And I don't think people realise how important the NHS is when we need it and it's there. We ring 999 and it's there. We go to the doctor sends us to a consultant to help save our lives and put us back together again. We have a car accident, anything, and we go to the NHS and private hospitals do not take on trauma victims. We need the NHS, we need to back the NHS, we need to support the hard-working staff in this NHS because this lot, this Tory lot, is privatising it and we'll be going back to before 1942 when we'll be paying it bit by bit and then those that can't afford it will be living in a tent to be able to pay for the health of their kids.
Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to say anything, but just 2 points. One, all we hear from the front benches of the government is they appreciate the hard work they're doing. But we need action, not just appreciate words that don't mean the right lot from them. But just what my colleague has said there about it going into privatisation, and it frightens me. Recently, not in this country, but in another place, I was unfortunate to be in the private healthcare. And as I was leaving the hospital, out of the ward, there was a gentleman at the side of me. And a doctor didn't come to see him. A lady in a clipboard came to see him with a pen and paper. And the first words were, once he's got his name, do you have any children? How old are they? Do you have, where do you work? How much do you earn? Do you own a car? How much do you owe on the car? Or is it leased? Before any doctor or anybody else would come to look at that patient. And that's what privatisation means. And God help you if you haven't got insurance or you can't afford to pay for it because you're left on your own devices.
Councillor Craig. Yep.
This last 12 months, I've been to Pinderfields and Pontefract more times than I can care to say. My husband was diagnosed with the non-Hodgkin's lymphoma beginning of last year, and he ended up in hospital 3 times. He's been in Pontefract for his treatment, he's been in Pinderfields to stay, and he's been in Dewsbury. So we've had a taste of all 3 hospitals. The last time he was in hospital, we had to ring 999. I rang the ward and told him what it was like. He couldn't walk, and they said he had to get in to the ward, take him straight to the ward. My son came home from work, because I don't drive, and we couldn't get him to the car. He couldn't walk. So we rang the hospital again. They said, ring 999 and get the ambulance out. We were going to have to wait 90 minutes, not for an ambulance, for a paramedic to come and talk to us on the phone. And when we got him in, it was so close, it was unbelievable. The sister on duty who were looking after him says to us one day, I nearly phoned up at 3 o'clock this morning to see how he was, because he had kidney faults as well as the cancer. And these are people that's devoted to the cause of the NHS. And if we didn't have people like that, and to look after them, our loved ones, who we all love and don't want anything to happen. My husband thought I was going to be a widow now. He didn't think he was going to live. Touch wood, is in remission. And I think we should all support this motion, and let's get our national health back.
Councillor Swift.
Chair, Councillor Ahmed was before me, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Swift. Councillor Ahmed.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, Councillor Swift. I think rare to say this, that Councillor Tully has raised something that is of great importance to the country, and not just Wakefield, but I think it's important to the whole country as we go along today. And it's something that's been boiling like education for a number of years. And this has been a problem. The NHS and also education, as I mentioned earlier, have been areas that need a national rethink on the way we run these services. And I think it's brought forward something that's important, and we need to acknowledge that there is a shortage of money within the NHS, and has been for a number of years. I think one of the councils mentioned 4% funding under Labour, but as you will be aware, that privatisation didn't come in under a Conservative government. So I think politically wise, I could probably even agree with you slightly on Jeremy Hunt as well, a little bit, not much, but a little bit. But you know, because I can comfortably stand outside and criticise the government, whether it's Conservative, Labour, if they are doing something wrong or I think is morally incorrect. So the question of morality here, and I do think it's important that I draw attention to the fact that I think it was David Hinchliffe MP, and in 2000, I've forgotten which year it was, and raised, I think it was in a Yorkshire Post article, and he was part of a parliamentary health watchdog, and he raised the fact that the PFI, which he knew I was going to raise this, under the Labour government, had become an albatross. That's his wording, albatross, around the necks of all the hospitals that have been built newly. So it was, that's his wording, not mine. And he's well-respected Labour MP, well-respected across many different parties, and myself as well. Other people respect him as well on there. So this crisis in the NHS, I mean, I don't want to go into personal accounts. I didn't want to go into a personal account. But all of us here have used the NHS, and all the age group use it a lot more. And it's right that the younger generations pay for that. And I think governments are afraid to ask the question about actually taxing people more. And I think the answer is we have to go back and say, some reason we have to bite the bullet and say that actually the taxation that we pay is something that has to increase to make sure that we're funding that gap. And I will come back to Councillor Dews and the UKIP on there, because I think we'll all remember that Nigel Farage held America's system of health service as ideal. And I think those people have been in the US will know how good the American health system is. and the inequalities that it has in there. So it was so that was Nigel Farage on record. I'm just pointing it out to you. But I personally have seen, I think it was 2 years or a year ago, my own father going to hospital with one nurse. I think it was 12 beds, working a night shift, one nurse without a lunch. So we decided as a family, and not everyone can do this, that because he was a severe risk patient, that we would stay with him because he had a head injury the day before and somebody wasn't able to do it. So we stayed 2 weeks whilst working in our normal jobs to do that. So there is, I can't sit here and say there isn't one, but I also know from my own other family members, under the Labour government, one of them who's passed away now, wasn't diagnosed at the correct time with cancer, passed away. So so this is, I think, like we said, basically the government has pledged more money, but I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's enough money that's being pledged. But I think there's a wider question to ask about the way that the NHS is funded and what we need to do to move it forward. And I think, although I think 98% of your motion I could agree with, but there's bits on there that you added on today that I think, like we said, it's not. If there was an issue, Jeremy Hunt, sacking of Jeremy Hunt would not address that issue. So I think that's the question on there, that we can, I think all of us here at the local level, if there was a slight rewording of the motion, etc., but if all of us on a local level, I would happy to agree with the motion and stand and look at the issue of privatisation, etc., but we have to acknowledge that successive governments have contributed to that privatisation. If it was right or wrong, we've all got different opinions on that area there. But it's important that we acknowledge the mistakes of all governments and the national agenda, national politics interfering in education, health and other things and not making them any better. So it's important that we address that while we're doing this and acknowledge that as well. So it's not just a Conservative government problem, but it was also a Labour government problem as well.
Councillor Farmer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Unfortunately, it just seems that it's come home to roost for all of us now. A couple of weeks ago, I watched Andrew Marr show, and John McDonnell was on that show. And in the interview, he said it's about time that the NHS took back the PFI debt. The National Health has more than 100 hospitals in the PFI. They would have cost 11.5 billion, but by the end of that, they would cost nearly 80 billion. The National Health Service is spending approximately £3,700 every minute to pay for the privately financial hospitals. Private firms have made pre-tax profits of 831 million over the last 6 years and poised to take 1 billion over the next 5 years. Theresa May should go after the legal loan sharks of the public sector. It's time for a windfall tax on them. Thank you.
Councillor Orwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What I object to with your attitude over there is that the Conservative Party don't want to privatise the National Health Service, don't want to deprive people of care. We know there are problems, but we're committed, as far as I know, and I'm committed certainly, that the treatment should be free when needed, at the point of application. The fact that some business methods have been used to create more efficiency, I don't think is the same as privatisation or saying that patients should have to pay. It's a means of providing the service better. Now, I agree some of these things don't always work as they should, and I think that PFIs have been wrong, and that if there's a way of getting the money back or, redirecting the money from PFIs back into actual patient care, that should be pursued one way or another. And the motion, the amendment to the motion is that Jeremy Hunt should be sacked because he's not doing a good job. I think he's doing the best job he can, and the fact that he wanted to take on social care as well reflects the fact that social care and the hospital services and the National Health Service have to be integrated. And that's the responsibility that he obviously took to Theresa May and said, I want to do that. And she obviously accepted that willingness to do that. That's why she didn't sack him, as you say. And I think that we should stop using the National Health Service as a political football. We've all tried to do our best. Now, whether that's worked in every case, you know, maybe not. We've all learnt by our mistakes. And certainly funding should be available, or more funding should be available, but we've got to make it as efficient as possible, or else we're wasting that money on inefficient practices. I'm sorry people are leaving the health service because they're overstressed. It's a difficult situation. We need to recruit more people, and we need to give them good working conditions. But the scaremongering that goes on sometimes, when everybody should be working hard to make it work, I think is wrong. And I think your side of doing that at the moment, you're demoralising staff and patients just as much as anybody else with this kind of attitude. And so, you know, that's as much as I want to say, really. Thank you.
Councillor Box.
Yeah, I'll be very brief because my colleagues have said everything and I agree entirely with every word that was said. If you notice what Councillor Ahmed does, he puts on this kind of voice. Oh, it's all a national problem, isn't it? Educational, national problem. As though the Tories haven't been in power for 8 years. You've been in power for 8 years. And what have you done? You've allowed the finest service in this country to slowly die. That's what you've allowed to happen. It needs more funding. I mean, Theresa May goes on the TV and says, we've got a plan for the winter crisis. The plan seems to be she'll do nothing. What is the plan? She actually wanted to sack Jeremy Hunt, is the truth. But she's so weak that she hasn't even got the bottle to do that. She didn't do it. She's got no authority at all. So actually, sacking Jeremy Hunt will help, because it will let people know, both the staff who work in the NHS and people all over the country, that it's time for a change. And to accuse Labour of scaremongering. Read what the consultants say. Read what the nurses say. Ask them. Go on the front line and ask people. And all we're doing as a Labour council, as Labour members, is bringing to the attention of the public the concerns actually of staff, that they're underfunded. And I'll tell you this. We on this side will always, as leaders of place, defend people. We'll be their voice, because a lot of people don't have a voice. We are the voice of our residents, and we are not going to give up that responsibility. You might, with mealy-mouthed words about, it's a national crisis. You know, it's been a crisis ever since you got in. Do something about it.
Councillor Shaw.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. About 6 months ago, if this motion had sort of come along, what I'd have done, I'd have certainly wholeheartedly supported it, but I'd have looked at all the details, and I'd have probably been saying a lot of what my colleagues are saying now. But unfortunately, and Peter alluded to it, I'm living within the National Health Service at this particular time, and I know one or two of my colleagues have said things. But I want to talk just a little bit about what Peter's alluded to there, because I think this is important. I've sat there in an hospital and watched staff, and this is why it's important you sack Jeremy Hunt, because I've watched staff and junior doctors not only under pressure, as certain colleagues say, they're under stress because they care and they want to care. They're caring for pets and they can't do it. They can't do it like they want to do it because the money's not there, the system's not there. And when you talk about Jeremy Hunt, like you do, he's gone along and screwed the junior doctors, they're the next load of doctors, and we can't get doctors coming through now. We had a meeting the other day. There's 3 consultants in Pontefract, 3 consultants in Pinderfield, sorry, and there should be 13. Where's the junior doctors coming from? It's demoralised them. Actually demoralised them. So when you say about this bottom bit's important, get rid of him, and I accept, yeah, who are you going to put in? Yeah, but maybe the person who puts in might be able to start building bridges, especially if he were from Labour Party. But I want to say about, I've sat there, and I'm going over there now, and there's 2 nurses, and I'll tell you what they're having to do. They're having to rely on auxiliaries. And I'll tell you what, they're doing a fantastic job, I'm telling you. The nurses are doing a fantastic job, the auxiliaries are doing a fantastic job, and I will tell you one little tale. 2 nights ago, there was a seriously ill individual in the next cubicle to my wife. They were so depressed with the 2 nurses because they couldn't get round for 4 hours looking after the other people because they had to look after that individual and there wasn't enough staff because there ain't enough money. So it is about money and it is about sacking Jeremy Hunt, and the sooner we realise that, the better. One final thing from me, because I think it's important. The Tories said 8 years ago, and they kidded a lot of people, that NHS will be safe in our hands. Do you all remember that? Safe in our hands. I'll ask a lot of people up there, do you think it's safe in the Tories' hands? Because I tell you what, I don't. It won't be safe until we're in power, and we will be, and we'll put it right.
Councillor Williams. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Very short, sharp, and to the point. People, they keep telling me that the Tories are putting more money into the NHS. Okay, if they're putting more money in, it's moving out a lot quicker in the opposite direction in private company profits. How can making profit for private companies, excess profits in a lot of cases, make a service efficient? How can people have the moral belief in the fact that you can make profit out of people's needs? And that is the one thing that I find really distressing when it comes to the NHS. People's basic needs and rights are being put on a profit scale, and that's not right. And I support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Rowley.
I think that everybody's contributed really well to this debate. What I really put my hand up to say is, Margaret, why do you always get it wrong? Why do you always, why sort of do you manage to sort of say things like, for example, there was 10 contracts recently, 8 were won by Virgin. Virgin are winning them because they have favouritism, but also they want to make profits for their investors. The point about it is we're now in a situation where we've got fostering, we've got privatisation of education, privatisation of the health service, admittedly as well through PFIs. All of them are actually helping to transfer money from the poorest to the wealthiest. And at the same way, our services are suffering. And anybody that can't see that, can't see the fact that cancer waiting lists have expanded, can't see the fact that a regular 4% was spent on health over many years, and now only 1% is spent, and the fact that we're charging nurses to train, the fact that we haven't got enough people in hospitals anyway, is all contributing to the chaos that Hunt has overseen. And to not see that amazes me. I just don't believe which world you live in, but it's certainly not where the rest of us are.
Councillor Jones.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm only going to say, I'm going to be brief as well now, because a lot of things I wanted to say before has already been covered. But I will pick you up on something, Councillor Ahmed. You said before about, the American system. Well, some of you on this side know that I am involved in a project which brings astronauts over here twice a year. And one of them's recently died. He went to the moon, and unfortunately, a few years ago, his wife developed cancer. He had to sell everything to pay for her treatment. He was left with nothing at the end. He'd worked all his life, he was a national hero, but he had to sell everything for her care. And I think on this regular basis, when they come over, in fact, last year, one of the astronauts came over, he asked me about the National Health Service, and we talked about it, and he talked about the system that they felt they got there. And he looked at me at the end and says, David, he says, defend the National Health Service, do not go down the road of our system, because it is terrible. Protect it, protect it, protect it. And they were the words of an American. So I'll have no trouble with a privatised service. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support the motion.
Right, we've only time for one more question, so it's our comment. So, Councillor Keith.
Sorry, mine was just a quick one to answer Councillor Jackie Williams. How this NHS funding thing comes about is that basically, if somebody wants to borrow 30 quid from somebody, what they've done is they've said, OK, you need £30. What we'll do, we'll lend you 25, provided you can make £5 worth of savings yourself, knowing full well that you can't make that £5 worth of savings. So the year after, you've come back and you want more money every year. All they're doing financially is they're setting the NHS up to fail. And so they'll always fall short of the target, and they will not be putting the money in. They can go in front of the cameras and say, well, we're funding the NHS more than we've ever done before. But that's because there's more demand on the NHS than ever there was before. And at the end of the day, that's the financial trick that Hunt has been primarily the culprit, the instigator of. That is why he should be sacked. Because he's administered all these cuts and trying to make it that rationing will be the way that he'll kill off the NHS and people will lose faith in the NHS. Let me say, as somebody who's in a party with growing membership and youth membership, you'll never do that. And whatever you break, we'll rebuild. And when we get a chance, we'll take it back and we'll do it right. I support the motion.
Councillor Eyre, you reserve the right to not speak. Do you want to say something now?
You've left the longest speech to last, I'm afraid. No, I'm kidding. It's all been said. It's all been said. There's just one small thing I'd like to say. Theresa May said, and it took me a long time to find this. She said, I believe in a state-of-the-art National Health Service, free at the point of delivery. I say one thing, and I say this. Prove it.
Councillor Tully, as mover of the motion, you have a right of reply. A quick one.
I'll try and be brief. And I agree. I often wonder with our colleague Councillor Jules saying that he gets you to Hunt, who do you replace him with? But I'll take that gamble, because my gamble would be the House of Cards would collapse, and the quicker it collapses, the quicker that lot are out, and the quicker our lot are in, and we can deal with it. And I'd take the other, his colleague's situation about PFI. And if I had my time to come again, I wouldn't have voted for it. I thought it were abysmal. But somebody must have thought it were alright, because we're still doing it. These lot are still doing it. With 2 hospitals now, one in Liverpool and one in Birmingham, I believe, that stood now with this Carillion collapse and the PFI contracts. So it can't have been all that bad. Having said that, you know, I would have not been, if I'd have been around at the time, I was around but not here, I would certainly not have supported it. And let me just say this, some people might get the opinion that I'm some sort of horrible, lefty, loony, crazy, but I'm not really. And I said this to you, Councillor Aldwell. When you make statements in this chamber about us at this side, demoralising staff, I take exception to it. And I'll tell you why I take exception to it. On the 18th of March this year, I will be married to my wife for 40 years. 40 years. And I don't look that old, but I will have been married to her for 40 years. And for the majority of that time, she's been a nurse. Through Labour governments, through Tory governments, through Labour governments, through coalition governments. And I can honestly say, in the last 3 or 4 years, I have never seen anybody come home from work at 9 o'clock at night if she's lucky, having been out of the house since 5:45 in the morning, and I often worry whether she's going to see the following day out. Absolutely whacked out on her feet and looks 90. And she's a little bit younger than me, she's 50-something or other. But the point I'm making is this. The NHS today is literally killing my wife early with stress and pressure at work and thousands of her colleagues like her. And I take exception when somebody can try to, first of all, by saying always make this party political. Well, it is party political. But then to accuse this side of the house as saying that we're demoralising staff. The reason why staff are demoralised in the health service is because the way they've been treated, it's about cuts and trying to work on wards with 2, 3, 4 and members of staff day after day, night after night. That is where the issues are. That's the issues that wants addressing. They will only be addressed by 2 things. The removal of Jeremy Hunt, and as a result of his removal, a Labour government which will start and put proper money into the NHS, and I support the motion.
We're going to move to the vote now. Please show all those in favour of the motion as altered. Thank you. Please show those against the motion as altered. Have we any abstentions? That is carried. That was the last item on the agenda. Let me finish, Councillor Wassell. That was the last item on the agenda. May I remind colleagues that the next meeting of the Council will be the Budget Council meeting to be held on Wednesday the 28th of February at 2 o'clock. Thank you colleagues for attending today, and you're all welcome back